Right, so a bit of bureaucracy, a sprinkling of dodgy decision making, and a heap of political opportunism. And here we are. Green Party Deputy Leader Rachel Millward, in her capacity as a local council leader, and her colleagues are getting shredded on social media for having the audacity to raise legitimate concerns over the Home Office's hasty, ill thought out asylum housing plans in Crowborough, deciding to drop 600 asylum seekers in a former military base. It's a move that makes you wonder if the Home Office's main aim was not just to house asylum seekers, but to guarantee a decent local rebellion in the process. The real kicker, though, Millward and the council had their power stripped away by Whitehall over this, as councils across the country have. They've legislated the power back into their own hands, who have then washed their hands of any accountability in relation to this, as Millward and the council raise their objections to it. So what do you get when you give local leaders no say, minimal information, and zero local engagement? A simmering pot of frustration and rightful outrage, which when they stand up for that, instead of addressing those issues, it's been branded as nimbyism instead. The Greens apparently showing their alleged true colours over migration, because it's fine as long as they aren't where they are, when the reality is too many people haven't read Millward's response letter properly, and the backstory to all of this they haven't got a scooby about. Welcome to the latest round of political gaslighting, as the establishment rounds on the Greens who are terrifying them, and too many people who are too hard of thinking have jumped all over the bandwagon. So let's peel back the curtain here then, shall we? Right, so the smear really only works if you don't read the letter that was being put out by Wealdon District Council. That's the starting point. Everything else flows from there. The attacks against Rachel Millward are not organic, they're not thoughtful, they're not honest. They rely on one method only, that people share a screenshot of said letter without seeing what comes before it, or even reading what's actually in it, and what came after it as well, and what the situation is on the ground there. The truth has paperwork, you see, but the lie has already done 3 laps of the planet before we've got there. The bad faith version doesn't actually have any basis at all, though. And that's why the full text of the letter matters. That's why the context matters. And that's why the attack collapses the moment both are placed in front of the public and they pay attention. It's why the bad faith actors are avoiding the full text or reading it like the plague, because it basically doesn't suit their aims, does it? Crowborough Camp is being designated for use by the Home Office as accommodation for up to 600 asylum seekers. This is not local housing. This is not integration into the local economy. This is not resettlement through community support networks. This is a mass institutional site on a former military training ground, outside of ordinary neighbourhood infrastructure, under a ministerial order which overrides the local council. The Home Office has the legal mechanism to bypass ordinary planning and local authority powers under the General Permitted Development Order of 2015. That is not something the council chose. That is not something the Greens endorsed. That is something central government imposed and remains in place to this day, with notice arriving in a confidential briefing only after the decision-making process had already begun. The structure of the decision predetermines the structure of the consequences. The people who must deal with those consequences were not allowed into the room where the decision was actually being made. And this is not a theoretical concern. The UK has already run this exact model before. We know it. We've seen it in the news before, haven't we? Napier Barracks in Folkestone, Penally Camp in Pembrokeshire, Wethersfield Airport in Essex, RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. Every time, the same pattern. Remote site, high density, no right to work, thin staffing, limited transport, limited access to advocates and caseworkers, slow processing, mental health deterioration through enforced idleness, in effect. Preventable harm as that is, and then community tension too, because people see large numbers of people who are not able to participate in the community and are held in limbo amongst them, in a sense. And then the council gets blamed for that. Then the councillors are the ones who get threatened because of it. Then government ministers point at councils and say the problem's local mismanagement. It's not an accidental cycle, it's structural, and we've seen it play it before. We know housing asylum seekers like this doesn't work. So this is the context in which Richard Millward and James Partridge wrote to Mike Tapp MP, that grinning idiot you can't seem to get away from on Twitter these days, who also happens to be the Labour Minister for Migration and Citizenship. It's not a letter of prejudice at all. It's not a letter of fear-mongering either. It's not a letter that implies asylum seekers shouldn't be there and are not welcome there. It's a letter that says we cannot safely repeat the same model that has already broken down elsewhere. We need engagement, resources, planning, clarity, and the right for human beings not to be held as idle detainees under the fiction of accommodation. Without that, the conditions will deteriorate just as we've seen happen before. The community tension will rise, and the people caught in the middle will suffer the most. So the best way to understand this is to read the letter in full, which critics have pointedly and patently avoided doing. So if they've watched this far, they better switch off, because they're not going to have a choice at this point. Dear Mike, RE, use of Crowborough Army Training Centre, Crowborough Camp, as alternative asylum accommodation. We are writing to state our strong objection to the decision you have taken to use Crowborough Army Camp as a temporary location for 600 asylum seekers, because the dire mismanagement of the situation is already causing major problems, and because we simply do not have information to reassure us that the well-being and safety of both asylum seekers and local communities will be properly safeguarded. As you will know, our council was not told that you had made this decision until after the news was leaked to the press. Along with East Sussex County Council, we received a strictly confidential briefing on the 10th of October in which our officers learned that you were considering using the camp. We raised significant concerns about the suitability of the site, but we were told that any decision about its use was a matter for you, and you alone, as Minister. Following that briefing, we wrote to you and highlighted various concerns. Quite clearly, accommodating 600 men on one site with no right to work brings significant risks. We had concerns about staffing resource at the camp, about police provision, and about the additional strain on already overstretched public services. Crucially, we clarified that it would be essential for the Home Office to communicate any plans properly and meaningfully with local residents. We requested you engage with all relevant public sector partners, e.g. with the Town Council, relevant stakeholder groups, local MPs and voluntary sector, and the local community itself. We were assured this would happen. We were told we would be able to meet you on site so that as local leaders, we could discuss concerns ahead of your decision. Your team assured us that all of this would happen and that a proper plan for community engagement would be shared prior to any decision being taken by you or any announcement made. Yet, you announced your decision on Monday without having met any of those commitments. This is an act of bad faith. Since your unilateral decision was unceremoniously leaked, worried residents have inundated the council and individual councillors with letters and emails raising significant and valid points of concern. We take no account of any racist or politically motivated communications that have also been received. Local MPs are outraged that you chose not to tell them in advance and are repeatedly sharing misinformation about our involvement. Local stakeholders are angered by the complete lack of communication or consultation. We note your position that you can use the relevant provision in the General Permitted Development Order of 2015 to circumvent the need to make a formal planning application to this council. Your commitment to public engagement is an acknowledgement that consultation was necessary in practice despite not being required in law. It is therefore regrettable, putting it mildly, that you reneged on that commitment. We observed your request for confidentiality, only to see this breached by a leak to the media, which we trust is being investigated. Did it come from within the Home Office? The leak resulted in an increase in community tensions and the spread of misinformation. This has escalated to threats to personal well-being of council leadership. These tensions will only continue to rise as we get nearer the proposed opening of the site. Please do not underestimate the gravity of the situation here. The Home Office's lack of presence locally is lamentable. Given your and your team's total failure to keep the promises made and the now obvious consequences of that failure, it is essential that you reverse your decision. Yours sincerely, Councillor James Partridge, Leader of the Council and Governance, Waste and Local Economy Portfolio Holder, Councillor Rachel Millward, Deputy Leader of the Council and Culture, Community and Communications Portfolio Holder. The meaning of the letter is in what it refuses to allow. It refuses the pretense that housing 600 people in a former military camp with no work rights is integration. It refuses the idea that a community can absorb change on this scale without any communication at all. It refuses to accept the government's expectation that local leadership will carry the blame for decisions taken elsewhere. It refuses to treat asylum seekers as a silent population without needs, without agency, and without futures. The critics are treating the refusal itself as the problem. They're not engaging with the substance, either deliberately or out of sheer ignorance. They are reacting to the fact the Greens did not play along with the established script, though Councillor Partridge, it must be said, is actually a Lib Dem. But the ire is being aimed overwhelmingly at Rachel Millward. And so it all smacks of a desperate gotcha attempt on the Green Party right now. The claim that this letter is an expression of xenophobia depends on removing the sentence that explicitly discards racist correspondence. The sentence exists, I just read it out. It's clear, it's direct. The letter states that racist or politically motivated communications were disregarded by them. That's not language that seeks to stoke fear, that is language that quarantines it. The critics rely on the public not knowing that line exists. They rely on ignorance that people will not have read it, much like many of them have not read it. The smear requires that erasure. It requires that only fragments of the letter circulate, the bits they can twist and bend to their own narratives. It requires that the public never sees the conditions under which the objection is being raised, that they don't bother to read the letter because it's just too much like hard work for some people and they just want to lash out at someone. Well, fine, you can do that. He's called Mike Tapp, though. The point about 600 men has been stripped of its context in every single attack. The letter does not say that 600 men present a problem because they are men. The letter says that warehousing 600 people in one institutional setting without the right to work produces risk. The risk is not the presence of people, the risk is the enforced absence of purpose. The risk is stagnation, the risk is time, the risk is the psychological effect of forced immobility. The risk is the community reaction to a group of people denied any route to participation in it. The High Court has already ruled that this risk materialises under these conditions. Napier did not fail because of who was housed there. Napier failed because of how they were housed. The critics do not address Napier, though, nor do they address Penally or the other instances I mentioned before. They do not address the legal rulings. They do not address the inspection reports. They speak as though this is an entirely new policy question appearing in isolation. They speak as though the failures of previous mass barracks accommodation are unknown or totally irrelevant. They speak as though the council's warning is speculative, when in fact it is descriptive. The evidence for it already exists because it's been done before and failed. The consequences already exist. A deterioration of mental health in barracks accommodation is documented. The effect of isolation on asylum claim processing is well documented. The effect on local infrastructure is documented. The breakdown at the point of police resource is documented. The letter names conditions that have already happened elsewhere. It's not projecting, it's recognising what's going to happen again. But the critics also ignore the housing situation locally, because this doesn't appear in the letter and it doesn't appear in the context. But it matters. Wealdon has thousands of unbuilt permitted homes because the development system is structured to protect private profit, not public need. The council cannot deliver social housing at the scale required because right to buy extracts properties from the housing pool faster than they can be replaced. The private sector cannot meet demand because the incentive is scarcity and they're land banking. The council has already laid this out to the current government in waiting. They wrote to Angela Rayner last October, more than a year before this most recent letter, which people are fixating on about now, laying out the housing problems and the infrastructure to support the required housing under Labour planning reforms. Build, baby, build, as is now Labour's mantra, doesn't work in practice when the builders say, no, fella, no. The land isn't worth enough to me yet to bother. So this crisis is structural and it predates the asylum accommodation decision. But the critics speak as though capacity is just a matter of desire. They pretend concern about strain as a cover for suspicion of outsiders and are playing the racism card and the hypocrisy card. They don't acknowledge that the strain is not speculative, it is a matter of record, and one repeated in many other parts of the country as well. The refusal by the Home Office to provide information is central to this. The council does not know what services will be in place for these people. It does not know how healthcare will be provided for these people. It does not know how policing will have to adapt for these people. It does not know how food will be managed, how transport will be coordinated, how casework will be delivered, how translation will function. The stuff councils do, you know. The council does not know these things because the Home Office has not told them. The council asked for this information. The Home Office promised to provide it. The promise got broken. And the announcement proceeded anyway. The leak came before clarification to the council even did. So the tension rose on schedule. The council named the cause of that tension. They identified it. The critics are trying to attribute the tension to the council, though, and to Rachel Millward personally, as some kind of a gotcha on the grains. This is deliberate inversion. It's the establishment closing ranks because the Greens are standing against the status quo and they simply cannot have that. And every fool that is joining in on this bandwagon is on the side of the establishment here. The involvement of local MPs is part of that inversion too. Nuz Ghani and Hugh Merriman, a pair of Tories. They were not informed either. Their anger is genuine on this point too, but they too need to be angry at the minister and not the council. The council cannot reverse the decision. The council cannot alter the camp. The council cannot give asylum seekers the right to work. The council cannot change the processing backlog. The council cannot alter the use of the GPDO to override local planning. The council did not choose the model. The council is being positioned as responsible for the fallout of a model it does not control. And this is part of the same pattern that we saw at Napier and Penally. The Home Office centralises authority but decentralises the blame for the fallout. The councils become their heat shields. The refusal to meet with local leadership is not a scheduling issue either. It's part of the containment model. The model depends on preventing local democratic input. The model depends on preventing local informed planning. The model depends on restricting the information the community receives until the decision is already in motion. The model depends on presenting the situation as inevitable rather than chosen. The letter identifies the breach of the engagement promise as an act of bad faith. The critics do not discuss this clause. They do not discuss why the meeting did not take place. They do not discuss why the community engagement plan wasn't shared. They don't discuss why the announcement was rushed. They skip directly to attacking the objector as somehow being the one at fault. It's not debate, it's misdirection. And we now come to the right to work. The letter names the right to work as a stabilising factor. And that's intentional too. The critics read that sentence as though it had said the opposite, though. The letter identifies the removal of the right to work as a cause of harm. The critics treat the identification of harm as the expression of suspicion. The difference between these readings is ideological, though. The Greens support the right to work for asylum seekers. They've done so consistently. I back that policy as a Green myself. The right to work produces agency. It produces connection. It produces structure. It reduces the vulnerability that these containment systems end up creating. It helps these people pay their way for however long they might be here for. The critics are defending a system that removes that right to work. The critics are defending enforced idleness. The critics are defending the very conditions that end up creating the community tension. And the critics call the people who object to this fearmongers. But this is a reversal so blatant that it can only function if no one is looking at the primary source. And this is where the real racism actually lies in this story, because so many are told to hate these people who have a legal right to be here no matter how they got here. It's how the asylum system works, and the only people who bleat about them being illegals are the ones who are actually the racists. The threat escalation against councillors isn't abstract either. That's also stated directly in the letter. It's already happening. It always happens in this model. When information gets withheld, when rumours fill the vacuum, when a large population is placed into an area in a way that isolates both them and the residents around them, then fear attaches to the nearest visible target. It's human nature being taken advantage of. The councillors are visible, but the minister isn't. The Home Office isn't. The people who ordered the containment will not see the consequences. The people who warned about the consequences will instead, and that is what is happening. Councillors actually being publicly open about such things, being attacked for it, is just ridiculous when we complain no end about never being told what is going on in our local areas. The critics of the letter are contributing to that escalation, though. They're doing so knowingly, ignorantly, or indifferently. But the effect is the same regardless. The letter ends by calling for reversal. Reversal is not rejection of asylum seekers, though. Reversal is rejection of the containment model being proposed, which we know from the evidence has already failed elsewhere. Reversal is refusal to repeat a harm that has already occurred. Reversal is a demand that asylum seekers be housed in ways that allow participation in community life. Reversal is a demand that integration be the goal rather than institutionalisation. Reversal is not a closing of doors. Reversal is the opening of a different one. But the smear only works if you don't read the letter. Now the letter's been read. The smear has nowhere left to go. But if you're still the sort of person to double down on this, every one of your accusations will be a confession. The only reason these attacks are coming at the rate they are is because the Greens are the anti-establishment party right now. Zach Polanski has doubled Green Party membership in just a couple of months of his leadership. They have triggered absolute panic. So to find out more about the wailing amongst the powers that be as more and more people back Zach and back the Greens, get all the details of that story here. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.